So the title of my speech is From Appearance to Disappearance, from the limited to limitlessness. As indicated by the title of my talk, I am interested in the double bonds within art between the limits and their transgression of materiality and immateriality, of the appearance and disappearance. In my talk, I will present some artists who seem to deal with the notion of infinity, and I try to show as well how their works can be interpreted to manifest infinity. When we talk about infinity in everyday talk, it is something that is impossible to grasp, as everything that exists is going to disappear, to die. For the human mind, infinity as a concept is something imaginated and fictitious. Nevertheless, for example, science can use infinity as a tool, and we can also, as humans, experience infinity, and often it is through nature. For example, when looking at dark sky with endless stars, or things disappearing to the horizon. And it was really nicely told by Hanna's presentation how artists also imitate nature nowadays. But somehow infinity seems to be connected to disappearance. So if the concept of infinity is connected to disappearance, how is it possible for artists to deal with it, to make it perceivable? The representation of infinity has always interested artists. The notion has been used to represent religious thought or spirituality. Since the Renaissance, artists have been leaning on vanishing points in perspective as graphical representations of infinity, using converging lines that terminate at a single point. Yet, in reality, Renaissance artists were just illustrating material objects in finite space, doing finite things and leaving the rest up to the imagination of the viewer. Contemporary artworks can give an illusion of continuity and limitlessness in a very different way. Infinity is used conceptually to force the mind to think beyond the constraints of the knowable. The unknowable can be known and it can be physically experienced, even if it is as a notion and abstraction. Endless repetition is one way to give an illusion of infinite continuation. Many artists like Ayoi Kusama or Roman Opalka use this repetition in their works. Ayoi Kusama uses mirrors in her infinity mirror rooms to make the reflections of everything that exists in the room, the image of the viewer included, to continue in endless repetition and to disappear in infinity. Roman Opalka, as shown also by Hanna, used numbers from 1 to infinity in his paintings to visualize infinite continuity. He was diminishing the amount of color in each painting so that at the end the canvas would have been just white, so nothing. Juha Vanningen, a Finnish artist, uses a GIF animation in his work as long as possible, now actually on display in the Ars 17 exhibition in Kiasma. And in his work, he starts the animation by number 1, and the number shifts onwards in 10 minutes interval, 1,000 years ahead, just to look back to the first number after 1,000 years have passed, and the whole thing starts again from number 1. Of course, his work is a kind of utopia, which can only be maintained if somebody really engages to do it for 1,000 years. One of the basic questions of being human is about the reality of our world. What is real, what is not? Our scientific worldview is based on an assumption of certain regularities, which can be crystallized into mathematical formulae and laws of physics. We have constructed a common world where fact and fiction seem to be mutually exclusive. But reality can also be seen as illusory by nature, which weakens the dualism of reason and imagination, or between reason and imagination. This dualism has been challenged by many philosophers after the Second World War, from Derrida to Foucault, from Levinas to Gilles Deleuze, and so on. For them, it is not possible to think about the limits without thinking about the possibility to transgress them. Parallel realities are possible, putting knowledge and information to the test when they collide. Such threshold experiences exceed the human scale. In Western thinking, the term of sublime is often used to refer to this kind of experience. Being on the border of or in the no man's land between different realities. In sublime experience, our reason and knowledge are taken to the limits. The sublime involves the idea of impossibility, representing the unrepresentable, saying the ineffable. The French philosopher Jean-François Lyotard has analyzed art and its relationship with reality in many of his writings. For him, the sublime explains how an event can transcend representation. The experience of the sublime is based on a breakdown in the striving for comprehension and imagination's failure to contain what is occurring. The event renders void not only representation, but also all expectations related to the desire to portray anything through narrative of any kind. Lyotard theorizes that in order to be ethical, an artist must refrain from making any statement implying finality or absolute comprehension. I quote, "What is sublime is the feeling that something will happen, despite everything, within this threatening void, that something will take place and will announce that everything is not over. That place is a mere here, the most minimal occurrence." When describing her feelings when entering to Anne Veronica Janssen's Horror Vacui, which you can see here in the image, a fog installation in the Belgian pavilion in Venice Biennale in 1999, Mieke Baal, an art historian, states that what it meant to her was a thoughtless, total submersion, that is to say, a kind of Lyotardian sublime experience. The space, according to her, was blissful, bright, and totally opaque, within which all sound was subdued. I had also myself same kind of feelings when seeing a variation of the work Mucca en verre in Villeurbanne near Lyon in Anne Veronica Janssen's major exhibition last spring. The work gave an impression of losing the spatiality of the space, of being nowhere. Actually, the image is now, you can see something, but actually the fog was so tight that you couldn't even see your own hand. So, one couldn't see even with your eyes open. The impenetrable mist was something very present and material, but at the same time out of reach and intangible. it blinded the eye, and yet it was possible to perceive the light. Ann-Veronika Janssen's arrangement engendered a loss of orientation, a hypnotic absorption in the visitor, who was invited both to sink into visual and perceptual environment and to become an observer of motion, even a contemplator. In Ann-Veronika Janssen's spaces, the participant was just present. With light as her medium, Ann-Veronika Janssen infiltrates material to create spaces through an enveloping fog. Light is always the subject explored. Examining the multiple properties of the phenomenon of light leads Ann-Veronika Janssen to create a dialogue between constructed and immaterial spaces, horizontally and vertically, surrounding and cosmic space, where the body shifts into a different space-time. Her yellow, blue, pink sees an entire exhibition space enveloped in mist of those very colors. The installation investigates human consciousness and what we are yet to understand of it. Her installation challenges our senses, perceptions, and ability to surrender to experience of logic. The viewer is thus invited to become more aware of how he or she perceives space and what can be the impact of the slightest sensual stimulus. Using striped-down gestures, the artist activates undefined zones between blindness and revelation. Olafur Eliasson's installation, The Weather Project in the Turbine Hall in Tate's Modern in 2003, used also this blinding effect, but in a different way. There was a huge sun-like light ball at the end of the hall, which attracted our vision at the same time as it blinded it. In this installation, representations of the sun and sky dominated the expanse of the turbine hall. A fine mist permeated the space, as if creeping in from the environment outside. Throughout the day, the mist accumulated into faint cloud-like formations before dissipating across the space. To see where the mist might have escaped revealed that the ceiling of the turbine hall had disappeared, replaced by a reflection of the space below. At the far end of the hall was a giant semicircular form made up of hundreds of monofrequency lamps. The arc repeated in the mirror overhead, producing a sphere of dazzling radiance linking the real space with the reflection. Generally used in street lighting, monofrequency lamps emit light at such a narrow frequency that colors other than yellow and black are invisible, thus transforming the visual field around the sun into a vast duotone landscape. Loss of clarity in the installation, loss of all kind of control, enabled our senses to perceive that which normally remains unseen, a sense of infinity. James Turrell uses similar effects as Ann-Veronika Janssen's, but in a connection to the legacy of abstract painting. He has stated, I quote, "I have an interest in the visible light, the light perceptible only the mind, a light which seems to be undimmed by the entering of the sense. I want to address the light that we see in dreams and make spaces that seem to come from those dreams and which are familiar to those who inhabit those places." End of quote. The eye, like the tactile sense, touches light as if it were a touchable thing. In other words, words, the less visual information there is, the more active the consciousness and the perceptual mechanisms become, bringing one to a richer, more sensual and spiritual experience. Taro's works are spaces of opportunities. This feeling of being submerged to the environment happens also in Katarina Gross's works, but in a more material and concrete way. She is painting multicolored spaces where the limits of the space are vanished exactly because of the use of color. Katarina Gross's works provoke a feeling beyond words. They allow the abstract to be abstract. The exhibition at the magazine Trä in Stockholm was entitled Infinite Logic Conference, so she deliberately wanted to allude to infinity. Grosse had decided to make a painting installation with 15 colors, and she used those colors for the spray paintings to be created on site. Representing the infinite is, in its very nature, problematic, but that hasn't stopped it from making an appearance in art time and again. Ayo Kusama tackles the concept in her installations of infinity mirrors, which are immersive rooms that project everything that is in the room in endless repetition. She started those mirror rooms in 1965. And also her net paintings have the same sense of infinity and continuing to the infinity. The experience of infinity in art could be defined as a kind of spiritual experience, whatever it means. In the age of image saturation, works that provoke a loss of sight can be a way to stop us and to make us look inside of ourselves, to our inner world, and to the infinite potentials being a human offers to us. This kind of art is contemplative and evasive. At the same time, it is material and sensuous. Many artists that offer passages of sensual experiences, optical as well as tactile, gain their imaginative power from materials and embark on their journey to the interior world from reflections on the birth and death of the body. Thank you for your attention.